Here's the list of modifiers. Modifiers, as name says, can modify objects. But in addition to modifying, they can also give objects new properties. Modifiers work like layers. We can stack them one on top of the other. We can select them and check the settings of each modifier. We can also expand additional options here. For example, I can bend this object here and use some additional options. As with work with layers, we can swap modifiers places. We can do it simply by grabbing one and moving it to the place we want. Modifiers can be deleted. It can be done by right-clicking the mouse and selecting Delete, or by selecting Modifier and clicking Trashcan button. We can also change modifiers' name. Here's rename option. We can cut them, paste them. We can copy modifiers from one object and paste them to another. By clicking this light bulb icon here, we can switch modifier on and off. Here is the test tube icon. If we will turn it off, then we won't see any effects of modifiers above the active layer. For example, now I have box layer active, so I can't see the effect of bend modifier. If I turn it back on, I will see all the effects again. Regardless of which layer will be active, the final result will be visible. If we'll expand modifiers list, we can notice that there are 3 sections. First section is kinda shortcut to most often used modifiers. It contains selection modifiers. They're also down below between other modifiers, but here's simply quicker access to them. World space modifiers and object space modifiers are different story here. Some modifiers from world space section cannot be found in object space 1. The difference between them is that world space modifiers, when used, are always on the top of modifiers stack. Maybe I'll simply use one for example, so you can see how it works. Let's take displace. And now for example, let's try to use something else. As you can see, it appeared below. Displace will be always on the top here. There are a lot of modifiers and they have different purposes. You can read about them in help or test yourself. And now we will discuss something that is a bit related to it. Copying. The simplest way to copy object is to use Shift button. You just need to hold Shift and then move, rotate or scale your object. In this case I'll use Move tool. So I hold Shift now and simply move my object. And now you can see I've got copy here. We can also choose how many copies we want. It is worth noting that the first option has been chosen here, copy. Now I'll do something different. This time I'll choose instance. And here I'll choose reference. So, here's our object. And here's our copy. We can modify this copy in any way we want. Each one independently. Here's our instance. You can notice that modifying it will affect all other objects except copies. It's worth noting that name here is bold. But when we'll go to copy, it's not. This bold name means that this modifier affects more than one object. That's how it works. As you can see, the name box is also bold here. So, if I'll change parameters here, it will affect other boxes too. Now you may start to think, what's the difference between instance and reference? Well, the difference is that the reference here has such a separator. Now, if I'll add another modifier, for example melt, you may notice that it's added to all objects, except copies, of course. What is added to the instance is added to all objects, including references. Now let's remove that. And now I'll add this modifier to the reference. As you can see, it's above this separator. And it works only for this object. But everything below this separator works for all objects. And that's the difference between instance and reference. There's one more thing to show you here. I'll select two objects now. And add them one common modifier. Melt. As you can see, it works for both objects now. You may notice that the font of this modifier has changed again. But this time it's in italics. This means that modifier is added to more than one object. When I select one object, then I can see all its modifiers. But if I'll select both of them, I'll see only modifier that's been added to them both. This modifier is their common element. using instances, references, and adding modifiers to groups of objects reduces memory usage and processing power. So it's really good to remember that. For example, if I'd add meld modifier separately to one object, then separately to the other, and then animate each one separately, the CPU usage would be much higher. One modifier on several objects is much lighter for the processor. It's mostly important when we use Turbo Smooth modifier, which is used to smooth objects mesh. Whenever it's possible, it's really worth to use it this way on as many objects as possible. That's all for now. See you next time.